My lords, ladies, and those who lie in betwixt. I am Tim, your host for this evening, and regular instructor at the Old Sword Club. And I'll stop that now. It's a bit ridiculous. But hello, everyone. I'm, again, Tim. I think I mentioned that just a moment ago. I am wearing a cheap party top hat, which I'm going to take off because it's, a very cheap party top hat. I don't know, like, I want as much as, I want me to have better hats as much as you. But speaking of hats, tonight we're talking about walking stick or cane and the fencing there is. So this is going to be kind of a crash course into something that I'm still in the process of exploring. I don't want to present myself as like an expert or like any less than like I normally try not to. But yeah, this is something I'm kind of coming at as from the perspective of someone who's done probably a lot of 19th century saber and a bit of like epee and Bowie knife and stuff. And so like as much as I probably won't perfectly represent cane self-defense, one thing I would point out is that a lot of the ways I intuitively approach it, even if they're not technically correct, are possibly mistakes that someone in the 19th century with a similar background, like, so, a British fencer who's known a British military saber, as in the saber practiced within the British military, like the military saber isn't a specific weapon or style otherwise, might like approach cane if they started learning sort of the conventional French cane method. The system presenting tonight is also kind of an aggregate of a few different manuals. So obviously the big one I'm using is Laboucher because he was kind of a trendsetter for cane in the early 19th century. And his method was like, his approach was very, very influential on what became later cane. But I'm also looking at the Defense of Arms Leroux manuals. So that's Andre and Renault, who both talk about cane as a self-defense weapon, but kind of from like a much, much more practical perspective. The one thing I actually would specify about them, much like a lot of sort of French kind of combative swordplay or like combative martial arts from the period, like practical martial arts, they expect that you have a background in combat sports, or I guess what you term, academic martial arts. When we looked at Chambon, he assumed that you already knew an amount of saber fencing, was just telling you how to implement that with a scabbard and with kicking. That's kind of similar with, I find it's kind of similar with Renault and Andre, where they kind of expect that they talk like you're a bit familiar with cane fighting already. And their advice is more about how to apply the conventional method of cane to like a self-defense situation, and particularly how to do things that combine well with other skills like savate and jiu-jitsu, or also wrestling and also English boxing, whatever your preference is. Anyway, let's get started before I talk about history all night, which I would totally have to do. So let's look at canes and grips. So something in a period that actually a lot of self-defense type people talk about is there are different weights of cane. That could be, a fairly light-ish cane like this. Also, actually a single stick, but I find it's really, really good for these movements. Or it can be heavier. I think it's more like an Irish shillelagh. Also, and I think it's kind of good to train with both because this was like cane originally was French, like French working class or French, like rural French stick fighting. Although unfortunately we don't have any sources for it when it was, stick fighting practiced by the average French person. We only really have sources once, from after the Revolution when it had been adopted and was being sold to the bourgeoisie. Not as, but still cool source and something important to keep in mind, because I think there is a bit of an element of you might need to use this with just whatever stick is at hand. There's also something to discuss, like Alan St. who's actually a British fencing source, talks about what kind of cane is ideal and what he recommends. And actually, Pierre Vignier, his method also discusses what kind of cane to use. And of course, no one can agree because it's all a matter of preference. And we've probably replicated that today on the internet where I was like, no, you need a big, strong cane. No, you need a quick, light cane. Whatever you prefer. Anyway, the way the cane does affect how you grip it in much of the same way as the way you grip or the weight of your saber or your cutlass does affect how you grip it. So if I come up and just get my hand close to the camera, you can see it. If I've got a light cane, what I want to do to grab it is I want to run my thumb down the back of the cane, the shaft, and rest it quite comfortably in the heel of my palm, so this bit of my palm. I then want, I want to be able to press down with the pad of my thumb. I then want to take my pointy finger, I want to wrap it all the way around so that the first pad, or the first knuckle of my, the first joint, I guess, of my pointy finger is pressing up and is pressing the shaft into my thumb to stabilize on the other side. So I'm now stabilized on this side and on this side. And then what I do is take the pad of my pointy finger and press the cane into the palm of my hand so that I'm now stabilized the cane on all sides. I have pressure on all sides of the cane. So, it's going to have to be wrenched out of my hand. It won't just bounce out by itself. I then take my root finger and do the same thing as I do with my pointy finger, but my ring finger and little finger rest very gently on the cane. They don't actually, in terms of grip, these two fingers don't provide grip. What they do, however, do is provide impetus to attack. So when I go to attack, I tense these fingers and I use that to kind of flip the cane. So assuming you form this grip, what I want you to do now is bounce the cane in your hand. Just let it bounce back and forth. And what you'll find is you start adjusting your fingers to control it better. Now this has two benefits. One is it helps you find your grip more naturally. Like if you tried to replicate my grip exactly, unless you have hands that are the length and width of mine, you wouldn't do it very successfully. And if you did successfully replicate the grip, it wouldn't be anywhere near as functional because that's not how your hand wants to grip things. And the idea behind bouncing is you'll adjust it so that you're gripping the thing in the way that's most natural for you. The other benefit is this bouncing motion, especially when you tense your bottom two fingers to help bounce and help generate some power, is also quite important to power generation with the stick. We'll look at that more when we look at tip slashes, although I think it's also very relevant with the parries. So yeah, just bounce the stick in your hand as a way of getting a hang of like what you're meant to be doing with the stick. Now for a heavier stick, for something like an Irish shillelagh or just a bigger stick, the grip is kind of the same as the heavier grip for a saber. What I do is I take my hand and I run basically this part of my hand, so from the heel to basically the heel of my palm all the way up to sort of the pad, or like my palm just under this knuckle, so just before my pointy finger. I run that down the shaft of the cane, so I've got it in a loose grip. Take my thumb, I use my thumb to press the cane on this side into the palm of my hand, so I've now secured it from two sides. I take my pointy finger and I use that to push upwards. So I've secured, the cane from all sides, from all sides. So it's not going to fall on my hand by accident. And you can overlap like this as well. I want to take my root finger and do basically the same thing, and my bottom two fingers just sort of sit there. Their job is to generate power. So I flick, I tense them to flick to generate power with the cane. But otherwise, I just want to bounce it back and forth in my hand. And you notice that my grip is actually tightened a little bit as I've done it to get better control of the cane, because the cane is quite heavy. And it's also a lot thicker than my heavy sabers. So I'm going to grip it a little bit differently. And as much as, the exact kind of just put pressure here, here, and here, and here is a good kind of basic guide to how you should hold something, really the test of bouncing in your hand, or even like hitting something like a boxing bag or some tires that have a bit of resistance, is a better way to understand how to grip, how to grip the weapon, because it's simulating, the actual demands of combat. Right, so I'm going to take a quick tea. Sorry, my swallowing tea sounds a bit gross, but there you go. All right, incidentally, if you do have any questions, just chuck them down in the comments and I'll get to them as soon as I can. just remember that I won't get to them straight away, especially if I'm in the middle of something. So if you can provide a bit of context, just say, like, don't just say like, what was that with the cane? Because that could apply to everything. Whereas if you're a bit more specific, like, oh, how do you want me to hold it when I'm parrying or whatever? That's a lot more useful for me. Anyway, let's have a look at the guard. So cane fighting is still very much based on fencing, and as much as, particularly in the later part of the 19th century, it started to integrate more and more with unarmed fighting, because a cane is not, as much as a cane can drop someone in the same way a punch can, it's nowhere near as reliable as a sword. So there's every chance that whacking someone with a cane would be a way of doing damage, but wouldn't be debilitating enough to end the fight. And you'd have to resort to sort of wrestling and boxing, but you're much more likely to back up with wrestling and boxing. But for the purpose of this workshop and the sorts of cane we're looking at, we're going to have a very, very similar stance to what we would use if we're fencing swords. So to start off, put your feet in an L with your cane side foot in front of your offside foot. And I apologize to everyone who's heard me give the same explanation of stance for every lesson. But yeah, I don't know like who isn't here. I don't know who my audience is. So I need to go over basics for anyone who might be new. But yeah, same kind of deal as you'll see in my fencing lessons, which I hope you've already seen, but if you haven't, definitely check them out. To come to stance, all you do is move your feet about 2 of your foot widths apart, and you want your weight centered between them. You want your weight about halfway between them to be the most versatility. You also want to bend down so you have a comfortable bend in your legs. And a good way to test if you're bent enough in your legs is if you look at yourself in a mirror or on, say, a computer screen whilst you're live streaming with something horizontal behind you, like, say, these blinds. What you want to look for is if your head is bobbing up and down, and obviously you're going to move a little bit up and down, especially when you're looking at yourself and not what you are to do, and not like where you're moving through space. But what you don't want is stuff like this where you're going up and down, because that's a sign that you're too high in your stance, which means your movements are very big and commuted and like that. One of those drinky birds from like the 90s where the water would make them bob up and down. Don't be like one of those obscure reference birds. You want to be low in your stance or like have your knees bent. It provides quicker acceleration, smoother movement, which is more concealed, but also more controlled movement. And you can change direction more quickly. When you're very, very high and your movement is very big, it's quite hard to control your movement and control distance properly. In terms of what your, let's say, offhand is doing, for tonight's lesson, let's just keep it out of the way. Obviously, depending if you're integrating other skills that offhand will help, will stand in other places. So it might be forward for wrestling or up here for boxing. But tonight we're just going to put it behind our back. So we're just going to rest it behind our back where it's nice and out of the way, the same way it would be in sabre fencing or French sabre fencing. And for our cane, we're going to adopt a tierce guard. So all we do is we bring our front arm, so its elbow is bent at slightly more than 90 degrees. Our elbow is sitting maybe about a fist in front of our ribs. So it's just hanging comfortably. You want your forearm to be vertical, and you want your hand turned over to basically this angle, which is the tierce angle, and you want to be sitting so your thumb is basically in line with the cane side edge of your body. This is a guard that is protecting your outside line. It's not a medium guard like this, like we do with stuff with sabre or foil. It's a tierce guard, and this is the most typical guard you see in cane manuals. Obviously, there are other guards, sort of hanging guard type things and whatnot, but this is the most common, so this is the one we're going to work from. And I quite like it. I actually think it's quite lovely and versatile. So that's how you form the guard. All right, just going to have a quick sip of tea and check my notes. And like I was saying before, if you have any questions, just ask them in the comments and I'll get to them as soon as I can. All right. So next thing we're going to look at is tip slashes. And I think I mentioned these before. So a tip slash is just, as it sounds, quick whip with the tip. These are not as debilitating or as deadly as the full blows or as like the proper cane blows, but they are important and they are useful. And especially if you're coming from a saber background or a cutlass background, doing these and learning how to do them effectively with cane will help you develop a lot of power generation when it comes to fencing with saber and cutlass. And also they're a lot more similar to saber and cutlass technique. And I actually think that you should be trying to basically try and merge your techniques so that when you do this technique with a saber, you hit edge on and cut. And so test cutting is also very useful for this. But when you do it with a cane, you hit with enough force to do damage. You don't want to just lightly tap your opponent. You want to give them a good whack. And again, these are not debilitating in the sense, but well, they are debilitating. They're not a fight ender, but giving someone a good whack on the hand or a quick tip slash to the face is a really, really good way to soften them up to deliver a big full blow that will drop them. So think of it kind of like a jab in boxing, except with a stick. Cool. So yeah, the reason tip slashes is one of the things Andre says actually is that pretty much any effort to thrust with the cane tends to turn into a tip slash, or should just be done as a tip slash because it's quicker. And obviously that's not true. Like if I line up and thrust the way I would with, say, a foil, I can deliver quite a powerful blow, probably more powerful blow than a typical tip slash. But I have to line up and really drive myself behind it. Whereas if I do like a quick kind of just poke, I can get a pretty good, pretty powerful blow that will, that will certainly open my opponent up and is much more likely to hit and is much less committed on my part. And so I think a lot of what he means by this is that tip slashes kind of fulfill the same role that thrusts do in terms of being able to be delivered quickly as a probing attack. And Jean-Joseph Renaud says that quick choppy punch cuts are better than prime blows because they're much less vulnerable to counterattacks. And especially in a self-defense situation, one of the things you risk is your opponent coming in and surging in at you. And giving them a quick tip slash can get a good hit on them enough to deter them from coming in. Whereas doing a prime blow, like a big proper, traditional cane, strike, might not be quick enough, and your opponent might be on top of you, or at the very least so close that you can't do enough damage if they're surging in you, particularly if they've got like a knife. The other thing that Renaud says with the tip blows is he says treat them like punches in boxing, where you're never going to do just one punch. You're not going to, it's pretty rare that you're going to knock someone out in one punch, and you instead want to deliver combos. You want to strike, and I find this actually works a lot better with the full blows where you strike, retract your full blow, and then lay your opponent out. My personal favorite is tip slash to the arm, and then use that as an opening to go for, to go for the head with a full blow. So let's look at the mechanics of that. So move closer as you can see now. Remember this bouncing motion we did before? This is the basics of power generation for the tip slash. What I do is I extend out, basically punch it out, and I bring my cane up to the position for the slash. In this case, it's just a cut number 2 position, and I flick it out. So, I extend, flick. And when I do this with footwork, a lot of the forward flick is done with the body. It's done with basically, if you're a boxer, think shoulder whirl. The good old shoulder whirl, except I'm moving basically my shoulder back and forth to get that last sort of little impetus to flick the cane forward. And the art to it is to keep the cane or keep the hand constantly moving forward until you reach full extension, even if your arm is full extended. So what I mean by that is, my hand moves to full extension. And to keep it going, I move my shoulder and then my foot. And And if I do this smoothly enough, the hand never stops moving. The hand never stops moving forward, even once the arm is fully extended. And the other trick to it is making sure that your tip lands when your toes line for full extension. So it is, I tend to do it on a demi-lunge, just because I find that this is a very good close range attack. You can do it on a full lunge as well, really whatever suits you. For reference, a demi-lunge is a lunge at basically half, or around roughly half the reach of a regular lunge. So my regular lunge is that, which is what, like 4 of my foot widths. So my demi-lunge is 3 of my foot widths. In that, like I started 2, 3 for demi-lunge, 4 for full lunge. Right, so let's actually look at doing some tip slashes. So we have 3 angles for the good tip slash. I'm going to turn cut 1, cut 2, and cut 7, named after saber cuts. So to do the tip slash, let's start with slash 1. So let's start with slash 7, because I find doing the straight vertical slash is easier to then modify. So all I do is I punch out. I come to bring my cane to tip as high as I can. And what I want to do is actually rock it out so that the tip of my cane doesn't retract like this and extend, because that's very visible. And that also can the bigger thing as well is, if I do that, I'm pulling my cane back, which is basically weakening my defense. So it's removing my engagement. I've got an opponent here who's got a cane crossed with mine. If I pull my cane back, it becomes much easier for them to come forward and smother me. Whereas if I extend it out to a position where I can hit them from, I've not ceded any ground and I've improved my position to deliver a strike. So I want to extend. I want to bring my weight forward over, kind of nominally over my forward foot. When I do this, I want to bring my knee, so it's over my outside toes. So I bring probably the middle of my knee over my little toe. To show it from front, I'm pushing my knee out a bit so that I'm not collapsing inwards. So I punch, come forward, weight, and I kick out like I would for a normal lunge. It rockets me forward and I hit. It becomes very, very, and because I brought my weight forward with this, it becomes a bit more ballistic than just the normal lunge might be. Although I find that when you practice both cane and saber, your lunges tend to average out, which means you have a quicker, more powerful sabery lunge and a longer, more graceful cane lunge. So let's practice that a few times. So extend hand, extend, switch weight, kick, lunge, and retract. Extend, shift, kick, lunge, retract. Extend, shift, kick, lunge, retract. Extend, shift, kick, lunge, retract. And once more for lock. Extend, shift, kick, lunge, retract. All right, so now I'm just going to call lunge. And I want you to do the whole thing is one smooth movement. And I want you to keep using the order that I just described. Extend, shift, kick, lunge, retract. But I want you to do it as one smooth movement. So let's begin. And lunge, 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 and lunge. Cool. And now, I've got a challenge for you. We're going to do the same thing, except rather than having a vertical angle, we're going to do it on a diagonal. In this case, we're cutting from our cane side to our off side, much the same way as we would for a saber cut. The other thing is we want to move our hand to the extended position for our hand rather than being here right in the center line with the cane vertical. The hand is actually going to be in line with the offside of our body. but so that our cane is in front of us. So actually, again, pushing forward and using that, keeping the cane in front of us to protect us. So let's give that a crack. And, but I want you to do the exact same lunge motion, just with your hand at a different angle. And I'm not going to go into excruciating detail, because a big part of learning this is learning to adapt multiple techniques. So, you ready? And lunge, 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 and lunge. Right. A quick sip of tea. Right. Now we're going to do that with cut 2. So cut 2 is the exact same hand position as tierce. So all we do with this is, starting with our tip forward, a nice tierce guard, extend out. We want to keep our tip as close as we can to where he's in the guard. Our hand stays in line with the cane side edge of our body. The tip, whereas the tip of our cane is like well past the offside, so our cane is again in front of us to protect us as we come in stroke. So I'm going to call lunge a few times. I want you to focus on getting that angle and integrating it with the tip slash mechanics that you've already learned. So when you're ready, and lunge, 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 and lunge. Wonderful luck. All right, cool. Now, you can both canes and even shake. 90% of my arms getting tired with the heavy cane. But now let's practice that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call out either 1, 2, or 7, and I want you to cut at that angle. So cut 1 is at this angle, this 5 degrees from cane side to offside. Cut 2 is the side from offside to cane side. And 7 is straight vertical, straight down the center line. So if you imagine there's a line made from my back heel to my front toes to, well, presumably the opponent's front toes and front heel. That's the center line. It's also the line extending out front from my shoulder, my arm straight. That's a line that cut 7 comes down on. Right, so I'm going to call 1, 2, or 7, and I want you to come to that angle. And I'm going to call it random just to make your lives a little bit more difficult. So I hope you like the challenge. So 2, 7, 1, 1, 7, 2, 1, 2, 7, 2, 2, 1, and 7. All right, cool. So I feel a bit of randomness will have helped you remember those. So I'm going to have a quick sip of tea. If you want to ask a question, ask it now. Got a few questions actually in mind. And so on here. So Mick said, can you please put those references up? I sure can, Mick. Yeah, I'll post those in the event. I'll post those to the event, and also, I'll post those to the event after we finish tonight. Although I'll have to do it. We'll have to do it from a computer that can access Google Drive, but yep. All right. And Bill wants to know, are you using the primary arm and shoulder movement, or are strikes coming from the torque of the wrist? Bit of both. So it's mostly arm and shoulder. In fact, I think the best way to think of this is more, think of it as the same mechanics as a punch. So when I'm punching, I extend, flick out, and I use the whirl of my shoulder and the extension of wrist to generate a bit of the power. But obviously, I also use a weight shift and the drive of my feet, or like driving my legs, to generate a power. And to be honest, the weight shift and the legs are what generates most of the power of a punch. But it's the same idea with this. It's just what my wrist does, wrist and hand position does, is they whip the tip to accelerate it, which is a big part of why this is a bit more powerful, because I've got like a big whippy lever. So I tend to think of this as punch and whip. I punch out to get the extension, and then I whip by using the shift of my body weight to generate the power, if that makes sense. Right. So now we're going to look at the cane blows. So these are the more typical blows of French cane. Tip slashes are less common. They're still certainly done and they're documented in a few of the defence done through manuals. But the more common method is to use a big cane blow. You see these as early as Laboucher, who's one of the earliest cane manuals we have. You see them in sort of the modern like living, so like cane de combat. I apologise to any French speakers. My French pronunciations are horrible. It's horrible. Those are my hats, I guess. I don't know. I really shouldn't rock my hats. I do quite like wearing mid hats. But anyway, so yeah, these are more typical. The reason, you deliver a big primed blow as a way of delivering damage. That the stick by itself is not enough to be debilitating. So just by extension, the same way that like a saber is. So you need to deliver a bigger blow to have the same effect. And what I find really interesting about this is the cane people who are essentially coming from a very, very fencing orientated background, tend to think of the cane as like a saber or like a sword, and so they're looking to find ways to cause it to have the same effect. The people who tend to have more of an unarmed martial arts background, who do things like Sabat and English boxing and whatnot, they tend to think of the cane more as an extra long, more damaging punch, and kind of use it under the same expectation. I think there is something there, but I don't know what. But I just find that kind of an interesting observation. Certainly, these big blows can be used with saber. I mean, in Italian saber, they have a similar idea where you basically go through this big kind of mulinello to deliver your blow. Obviously, the physical motion of it is different, but the effect is much the same in terms of just laying someone out. And I think the way I tended to approach these as a concept was to think of them as moving through parry positions and hand positions, which I sort of was working into that assumption, and then I posted a line about it a little while back, and someone's like, no, that's not how they work. These are different hand motions, if only slightly, but they are different, but they're still, it's similar, and I think it's a good starting guide. And then, you can modify there to be more kind of authentically cane. So let's start. So we're going to look at cut one to the head, passing through what is essentially the head guard position or St. George. So if I'm on guard, and my head guard, I'll deliver a big flying blow. Cut number one being this cut. So we saw that with the tip slashes. A cut one it's going from cane side to offside. I want to prime it, so I pull back to this head guard position, and you can totally do this as a parry. This doesn't mean, in fact, if you are parrying, you're basically going to do big cane blows by default. I pull back to this position where my elbow is bent at a bit over 90 degrees, cane's held out, sort of how much in front of my head. And it's held probably in line with my eyebrow, in line with my forehead, and the eyebrows. How high you hold it depends on how tall you are, or how tall you are compared to your opponent. Obviously, when your opponent's attacking, they're going to be coming in at an angle, so I don't need to be all the way above my head to lift the cane off or to protect my head. I just need to be out in front of it. I find as a taller person, I can hold this a little bit lower to be safe, whereas a shorter person is going to need to hold higher. Also, sometimes what people will do, cane, is they'll try and come all the way over the top of this guard, in which case you have to hold it high. And for the time being, I'm just going to pull to head height. We're going to draw, see how I'm actually pulling my hip back, and then shows from the side. I throw, I bring my tip forward, I lunge, I come back. So, guard, head, throw, retract. Throw, retract. Notice I'm coming back to the same guard position so I can throw multiple cuts from here if I really need to. So let's just go through a few repetitions of that. So head, throw, retract, guard, head, throw, retract, guard. And you notice that once I get to here, I basically move to the same position and move in the same motion as I did for the tip slash. So if you remember, this for the tip slash, with this I just pull back out an extra step. So head, throw, retract. 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 And head, throw, retract. Head, throw, retract. Fact. So, yeah, Bill just pointed out in the comments, it's kind of like a snap cut. It is. You basically try to accelerate the tip as much as possible. So the next one we're going to look at is basically throwing a cut number 2, but passing through prime. So what I do is, starting here, I move to a prime guard position. So my hand is normally on the center line, really, but my tip is on the other, is very much past the cane side of my body. So I'm covering certainly my inside line, covering my head, and also covering my inside line here, my cane side. And from here, what I want to do is just keep the circle going. So you notice how my tip kind of dips down, or my tip kind of moves in a circle to get to this position. I'll just keep that going until I come to a cut number 2 position. So I start a guard, come to prime, I come to the extension position for cut number 2, from think back to our tip slash or to my saber stuff, and then deliver a blow. And same deal here. I actually want to pull my hip back a bit, so I'm getting a bit of rotation, a bit of whipping rotation as I go. I find it's better to do this a bit later in flight, so I flick and I pull my hip back more as I'm extending, as a way of kind of accelerating a bit more. But your mileage might vary a little bit on that. So to show that from the side, guard, prime, extend, kick, retract. And I'm coming back to the priming position. I'm not coming back to a guard. The reason for that again is that I'm covering, priming position covers me as I come back. Or covers me either as I'm coming back, but also as I'm about to come in. So I don't need to come all the way back to a guard and then parry, which is kind of useful. Right, so let's get a few repetitions of that in. So prime and cut, guard. Prime, cut, retract, guard. Prime, cut, retract, and 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 guard. Prime, cut, retract, guard. So we're getting a bit smoother actually. Let's go. Just prime, cut, retract, guard. And prime, cut, retract, guard. Prime, cut, retract, guard. And prime, cut, retract, guard. Right. Cool. So you can sort of see how like each of these different mechanics kind of comes together a bit, where you're moving from a prime position to essentially the same mechanics or the same positions you move through to get to the tip slash. A big part of 19th century, or any kind of fencing, 19th century fencing, is moving through these defined hand positions, these defined body positions. Right, so next one we're going to look at is cut number 7, so a straight vertical cut from what I've termed low prime. So I'm not coming all the way up to covering here. I'm just doing a quick flick here in front of me. So just, this. And it's a low prime. I'm not covering myself against a high blow. But the advantage of this one is it's a good attack to the opponent's hand, and particularly if your opponent has a knife. An opponent with a knife can be quite dangerous, but if you smash their hand up, they become a lot less dangerous. This can be quite a good way to do it, or at the very least a way to get them to back off. And I find in cane systems that don't really have the full-on tip slashes, this can also kind of serve the same function as a kind of quicker attack that can be used to open your opponent up to bigger attacks. So, from our guard position, come to low prime, this position, and cut straight down, and back to low prime, back to guard. So low prime, cut, low prime, and back to guard. Low prime, cut, low prime, back to guard. Low prime, cut, low prime, and back to guard. Low prime, cut, low prime, and back to guard. Low prime, cut, low prime, and back to guard. Low prime, cut, low prime, and back to guard. Right. So that one can be quite, and you can sort of see how this might then lead into combinations where I might go, all right, throw a low prime cut, and then as I retract to like a high prime position and come in with a much bigger blow. So I could use this, use low prime as a way of forcing my opponent to withdraw their hand, and then as they come back, they create an opening for me to then have a go at their head with a bigger, more powerful blow. All right, let's check if there's more questions. All right, cool. So next one we'll look at is we're going to start from our guard. We're going to move to the position of high octave. So my cane is on the outside. And I'm going to whip it up and cut number 4. So I come to here, and I go all the way around my body and raise, coming in at this angle. So we think of cut number 1 going down, cut 4 comes back up on the same angle the other way. So right octave, my hand is pretty much on the center line. This is a defense to the outside, although it doesn't give you a lot of coverage. Unless, of course, your opponent is not quite in front of you. I find that if you're traversing, this is a good cover. Also, if you're on horseback, if you're fighting with a cane on horseback, or possibly when you're on a bicycle and you're riding past someone, this is an excellent cover. But we're going to use it as a way of setting up a rising cut, the rising cut to the hand, because the way a lot of people respond to this is they'll expect them coming either this end, with like a 1 or a 2. And so if I come with the rising cut, or they'll usually raise, defend that, I can use that as a way of opening up their hand for a nice quick kind of rising cut. So from here into the high octave, swing all the way around and lunge and cut, and back to guard. With this one, I find it's actually easier to retract back to tierce than come to here and then retract through octave again. So from the side, octave, 4, guard, and let's repeat that a few times. Octave, 4, guard, 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 and once more for luck, octave, 4, and guard. So I quite like this one as almost a feint. Well, it is effectively a feint, but I'm feinting using my priming movement rather than my cut. And one thing I find you can implement that in a fight by, if I go through octave to deliver high blows, I get my opponent used to going high, especially if I deliver really quite high blows even with the false edge of cane. And so my opponent gets used to reaching higher and higher to parry. That's when it's rising cut to my opponent's hand or to their elbow, particularly, it becomes quite deadly. It's also possible to do it to the groin, although, I would recommend against that in most training situations. All right, sweet. So before we move on, check if there's any questions. Have another sip of tea. Oh, it's thirsty work. All right. So now let's look at parries. And you have some parries in some manuals that look pretty much like saber parries, maybe a little bit more percussive. But you also have something that Leboucher does, and this is actually quite common to, this is similar to Valville, is all of his parries are done on the extension, but also on the slip. So rather than parrying with, say, a conventional cart parry, what he'll do is he'll punch out and slip, so he'll bring himself back and strike out with his cane. And I kind of wonder if there's a bit of a relationship there, or a bit of a similarity between what was coming in with French counterpoint at the time, the counterpoint being sort of a system of French sabre that was replacing the older French system of espadon. I kind of wonder if there's a bit of sort of cross-pollination of stick and sword there. Certainly in the French military at the time, they were encouraging soldiers to learn cane and to learn stick fighting because they thought that it would, they figured it would improve swordsmanship. And I would agree with that. I think doing cane is quite a good way to learn things like power generation. And also, if you train with particularly light canes, it's give or take fairly safe. Their friends across the channel in Britain, fellow fencers, were doing single stick with relatively little protective gear at this point, probably thinner sticks than this, and you're able to fence at a reasonable speed, get a few bumps and bruises. So yeah, I kind of think that I do wonder how much of an impact cane had on the development of 19th century French sabre. Although unfortunately we have very, very few sources for French sabre, cutlass, or French espadon, the system that preceded counterpoint. And unfortunately for me, none in English and speaking French, as you can tell from how bad I pronounce it. Right, so we have a quick question which I might just quickly answer before we move on. So Bill wants to know, angle 4 could be used as a shot to knee or up to the shoulder. Is that right? Certainly to the knee, probably to the belly. I don't think it would have much power if you delivered it at shoulder height. But your primary targets with this kind of angle. Other than sort of knee, if you've got low, or groin, if you're being a bit mean. But you're mainly looking at things like the elbow when the person's in guard or in parry position, the hand and forearm or rising blow, all of the stomach, the ribs. I mean, you could go as high as the shoulder, but I don't. I feel like that would be a very, very wide movement. So it'd be very, very, to get a good target, something that's not like a very meaty part of the body, would be a bit difficult with a rising cut. And this is actually something to consider with cane that you don't have to think about with saber. With cane, you have to be a bit more selective about targets. In the same way that, like, in boxing, you can't just punch someone anywhere and expect it to have, have a reasonable effect. Most blows have to be targeted at the body or head. And even then, with the torso, punching someone in the chest is not going to, only going to have a very mild effect on, or, only going to go a very small way towards dropping them, compared to, say, punching them in the belly or in the solar plexus, or particularly like the kidneys or liver. So yeah, target, like actually where you target with this is kind of important, and I don't know if you'd actually be able to get debilitating targets by going as high as the shoulder, except in very specific situations. Right, anyway, let's look at our parries. So the first parry we're going to look at is cart. So if we're here in tierce, and our opponent comes in and attacks to our inside, all we do is turn our hand over to basically the same angles we have at cut number one. So this angle, we bring it in line with the off side or the non-cane side of our body. We keep our tip either on the center line or even in line with the cane side of our body, depending on if they're cane and what's comfortable to hold. I find even though with saber I prefer something my tip to be on line with the other side of my body. With cane, I want a bit more percussive. I prefer the tip on the center line. And we bring the tip high. We're actually from the side. My tips go on from here, where it's roughly level with my shoulder and pointed at my opponent, to being probably a bit above the height of my head, but it's being held at roughly 45 degrees. Because this is a parry, I want to stop my opponent from disengaging over my weapon. I want to form a very strong defensive shield, and if my tip is too low, it's as low as it would be in a guard, there's a chance that I might miss. So 45 degrees is the best angle for a parry. The other thing, unlike a saber parry, where I can gently move to this position to form structure, in order to protect my hand and also take advantage of the bounciness of the stick, I want to do this a bit percussively. I almost punch it to that position, which is also why I hold the tip more forward. So I do this, I can't really punch properly, whereas if I have the tip on the center line, it's still providing a reasonable amount of coverage, still protecting me from feints as well as it can, but I can get a nicer punch. So let's do that a few times. So starting in tierce guard, and cut, 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 and cut. All right, so that's the cut parry. Next parry is tierce. You're unlikely to do this from a tierce guard. You're usually doing it as really from any other position. But a tierce parry is just the same as a tierce guard, except the tip is held higher. This is generally a distinction between a tierce. Well, there's generally the distinction between a guard and a parry in 19th century fencing, particularly as thrusting becomes more important. Is a guard is held with the tip facing towards the opponent, usually about shoulder height, whereas a parry, the tip is held high, usually about the height of the head, if not higher. Or the blade is held at about 45 degrees to give you adequate coverage. So, to practice this position, let's start in our cart, in our cart position. We're going to bring our hand over to the other side of our body. We're going to hold it at 45 degrees, and we're going to whip our tip up. So, starting in cart, basically a cart guard, so we can't parry and tip low, whip to a tierce parry, and back to our cart guard, tierce parry, 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 and cart guard, tierce parry. Right. So next parry in our repertoire, we don't have quite the same range of parries that we do. Well, you can do them, but what is a useful parry with a stick is a little bit different to what is a useful parry with a sword. And this is, I think, kind of one of those things that's quite important to understanding why, say the slash single stick in Britain was basically the same system for multiple weapons. Was the techniques don't change so much as the tactics. In the same way that in Cutlass, it's harder to form opposition and it's harder to countercut, but slipping becomes much, much more viable. Whereas with Saber, slipping is much more of a secondary defense, but you can countercut and counter thrust much more easily, and you can keep your blade engaged much more aggressively. With stick, the sorts of parries that you prefer tend to be the ones that can be done a bit more percussively. And that means that we do set time and second. So, looking at our for set teams, which is defending basically our low inside, all I do is I draw a little circle with my tip. I actually let my tip circle out a little bit. I don't want to go straight to the position. And then I bring my hand in line with my offside edge. The tip, cane's held tip down, out at about 45 degrees, keeping my elbow in. And I want my tip to be about the height of my knee. I want my stick to be out at 45 degrees. So that, if my opponent is going to slip through that, they're going to have to come really, really low, which, doesn't really bother me because I'll just slip my leg and take the head. So this is a good kind of, if I get closer, if my opponent wants to be able to throw lowish without being easily counter hit, they can't throw too low. Right. So from the front, draw a circle, hand in line with the body, and we come to set team. And then back to guard. Set team, 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 back to guard. And once more for luck. Set team, and back to guard. Right, and now let's look at the next parry, which is second. And there is a numerical order to this, but the numerical system comes from French foil. So what is an intuitive order in not a thrusting weapon is a bit weird. But we have some second. It's kind of like set team in reverse. Curl my tip out, turn my hand over. I do actually extend my arm for this one just because keeping it retracted is not really possible or comfortable. And I want to hold my stick out at about 45 degrees, similar kind of height to set team, but this time in line with the outside of my body, or with the outside edge of my body, cane side. My palm is facing out, so that's in kind of this alignment. And that's my second guard. So from here, I second. You can do it on a full mullet, get it really explosive. So you can do that. I find that I just want to draw a little circle and snap out and be quicker, and be as quick as possible. Back to guard. So second. Yeah, and second. Second. And back to guard. Second. Back to guard. Second. Back to guard. Second. Back to guard. Second. And back to guard. Right. Now, we're going to do is we're going to move between those guard positions, because moving randomly between parry positions and guard positions is a really good way to memorize them, because your brain starts to associate an end result with the position rather than associating a process. And it's much easier to remember. It's much easier to remember one thing, which is the position you hold your hand in, rather than the procedure of getting there. And also just doing stuff randomly seems to help with memory generally. Don't ask me about the neurology behind it, but getting people to perform drills, or perform techniques in a random order has proven to be a lot more effective long-term memory than getting them to do repetitions. So doing 10 repetitions of the same move is better for short-term memory, but worse for long-term memory. Whereas doing 10 repetitions of a move as part of a bigger set where it's random between, say, 4 or so moves, has shown to be more effective long-term memory, which I think is cool. I'm really looking forward to Sunday's talk on pedagogy. And also tea. So, following along, come to guard and septime. I want you to stay in the position until I tell you to move. So when I say guard, come back to here, and second. Because occasionally you're going to need to move between positions. Like now we're going to go to a tierce parry, and carte parry, second. So septime, and this is second, and septime, and carte parry, tierce parry, guard, second, tierce parry, carte parry, septime, tierce parry, guard, tierce parry, guard, second, and carte, tierce parry, guard, septime, second, tierce parry, carte parry, guard. So yeah, something to practice and just in your own time is to practice moving between those positions, because I find that's quite a useful way to memorize them. So next we're going to look at the way the voucher does his parries, because I mentioned before they're a little different, and I find they're really good good to have multiple parries or multiple solutions for the same problem, because that then opens up different opportunities. So really punching out and slipping opens up different opportunities for counterattack than just doing a static, like a standing parry does. Also, when I first started looking at cane stuff, I'm like, oh, these will be really good with Sabre, and then I discovered that in Pavil parries like this as well. So with voucher parries, what he does is he springs back to first position. So he basically pushes off his front foot, springs back, so he's moving his body back. You notice how I'm starting here in sort of a mixed, or with my weight between my feet. I spring back, and now my weight is entirely above my back foot, and I physically move back out of the way of the attack. And as he does that, as he springs, basically jumps back, he punches his hand out, same angle as, carte, tierce, or even head, with the head guard, but the arm is extended fully. So think of it as a carte angle with an extended arm. So let's practice that a few times with carte. So what I want you to do is slip and carte, back to guard, slip and carte, and 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 back to guard. Now we're going to try the same thing, but with a tierce parry. And we can do this quite easily from the guard. And I find if someone attacks on your cane side when you're in the tierce guard position, particularly if they're trying to really blast through your guard, like if someone throwing really hard attacks, this is a really, really good solution. So I'm here in my guard, and I slip and punch into tierce parry. I slip and punch into tierce parry. I slip and punch into tierce parry. Slip and punch into tierce parry. I slip and punch into tierce parry. And slip and punch into tierce parry. Right. And the final one is what we'll term the head guard. So from before, I came back to here, same kind of angle and extension, but the arm is fully extended. You have to take my word for it that it's up there, but yeah, it's quite high. And this is quite useful, especially if you've got someone who likes doing this sort of stuff, like flick over the top of your guard to try and come around. You can punch really, really high. Because you're using percussion on the cane, it will knock the cane back, and then you've got the bounce the wood, and you've also got the percussion to punch. And also you're physically jumping yourself up as well, so you've got a lot of power going up. The Boucher was reputedly quite short. Like contemporary French sources comment that he was a shorter man. And this is something that works very well for shorter people, or if your opponent is taller than you, because if your opponent comes really at any kind of head angle, you can just punch up, and you're mostly covered. There's a minor risk to get away in your fingers depending on the angle, but if you notice how my hand is still my thumb is in line with my shoulder. I'm not letting my hand drift inwards. I'm keeping it wide. I'm keeping it moving to a position where my opponent's never really going to target. They're going to target my head, or even if they're targeting my shoulder, my hand is just outside, and also just the percussion of this should displace the cane enough that they won't hit it. So from here, from the guard position, what I do is I slip and punch up. I slip and punch up. Slip and punch up. Slip and punch up. It's okay to have a slightly downwards angle. You don't want to ever let it have much of an upwards angle. Having a downwards angle is fine. There's in some sources that's explicitly what they say to do. Being horizontal is fine. Being upwards, I imagine, is fine as well, although something might slide down onto your hand a bit. But yeah, probably aim for a horizontal to slightly drooping angle. So, slip and punch and protect your head. Slip and head guard. Slip and head guard. And once more for luck. Slip and head guard. Right, so I'm going to take a quick sip of water. Does anyone have any questions while we're here? Oh, that's the stuff. Right, so now let's look at those. Let's do those randomly. So I'm going to just call tierce, cart, or head, and also guard. Obviously, if I say guard, I want you to move to the guard position. If I say tierce, I want you to do the tierce parry. If I say cart, I want you to do the cart parry and a head parry, but all of them on the slip. So these aren't the conventional just here or here. If I say tierce, it's this. If I say cart, it's this. And my head is this. Right. So from a guard position, head, and back to guard. Tits, guard, cart, guard, head, and cart, tits, head, guard. Remember, these are positions that you move to and from. Like, these are not procedures. You make the procedure up as you go, and you just get better and better at moving optimally. So, head, guard, cart, tierce, head, cart, guard, tierce, guard, cart, guard, head, guard, and tierce, and guard. Right. So those had a parallel slip. I find that it's just a cool tool to have in your toolbox as as you're fencing, particularly if you parry the same way multiple times, your opponent's going to start predicting your parry. Whereas if you mix it up, you've got a lot more versatility. So let's just check how we're doing for time. We are doing mostly okay, so I might go for a little bit longer. One last drill, we're going to look at reposting. So reposting is really, in principle, it's that same thing I've been talking about, how you're moving between positions. But, reposting is when you specifically do it from a defensive position to an offensive position. So I start my guard, I parry cart, and then I throw a rising octave cut. And something you can do is just with each of the techniques we've looked at tonight, is try randomly moving between them if you're training by yourself. And then if you've got a friend to train with, you're a very special friend, try taking turns between moving between offensive and defensive position. So if I had a friend, hypothetical friend, I'm attacked by my magic friend takes a turn to attack. I defend, it's now my turn to attack. So I decide to do a quick tip slash, my friend defends, and so I move back to a defensive position, and this time I decide to throw a full cane blow, which my friend then parries, and I come back to a defensive position, and then I throw a different blow. So just moving back and forth like that can be really, really good if you've got someone to train with. If you don't, moving randomly between positions is quite helpful because it gets you into the spirit of it. And if you've got someone, if you've got a friend who isn't interested in fighting but is perfectly happy to just sit around in the garden and yell things and sporadically yell commands at you, you can even get someone to just yell at you, tip slash one or cane blow one or something like that. Right, so let's actually look at all the stuff we've learned tonight. I'm going to call it out at random. If I call, just to avoid confusion, if I call, say, like tip slash one, which is tip slash on cut angle one, which is this. So tip slash one will be that. Whereas, whereas if I want you to do a cane blow, I'll say cane blow one, and I want you to prime and throw cut number one. And if you prime a different way to what I was expecting, that's fine. I will be demonstrating it so you can follow along. But yeah, like learning to throw the same cane blow from different priming positions is also really, really good for kind of, I guess, if the actual individual movements are your movement vocabulary, then I guess this is kind of like your movement grammar. I don't know, language of movement. And then with, if I call like, say, cart parry or tierce parry, once you move to just a standing position, if I call cart slip, if I call something like, say, cart slip, I want you to do a slip and parry. I'm sorry if I'm varying out my terms, but it's been a long day. You have to excuse me. If it annoys you, we'll be able to fence in person soon, so you can come and try and actually beat me up. Right. So from the guard position, I want you to do a cart parry, second parry, cut one cane blow, guard, and cut 2 cane blow. Guard, tip slash 1. Tip slash 7. Guard, slip cart. Cane blow 1. And tierce parry, cart parry. Slip tierce, cane blow 4. And guard, tip slash 7. 17 parry. Slip tierce, cane blow 2. And from here, tip slash 1. And guard, head slip, and cane blow 7. Head slip, cane blow 1. From here, cane blow 4. Guard, tierce parry, tierce slip, cart slip, head slip, tip cut 7. Cane blow 4, cane blow 4, cane blow 4. Guard, and let's just leave it there because I'm tired. All right, cool. So that's kind of my cane crash course. I'm working a more detailed course. So when we come back and do physical lessons, I can do the cane course. You're going to get a lot more. You can get that broken up into a lot more detail with some kind of interactive drills that we can use to learn it. Yeah, but other than that, I hope you enjoy the evening. Before we go, are there any questions or anything you want to ask? Just give you a second. I really need to. Yeah, really need to come up with like some historical facts I can, bring up at this kind of time to give you time. All right, cool. Well, thank you, Mick. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, my arm is sore as well. Just like switch to the lighter cane halfway through because I'm just like, yeah, I'm not going to. Good exercise. I'm actually wanting to get into Indian clubs now. I think that'd be really, really good for building stuff up, like building up our limb longevity. But for the time being, just I'm gonna have to deal with sore arms. Maybe have like have a nice massage or something afterwards. Right. Question from Bill. Couldn't you use a reverser thrust from cart? Yep, let's actually, that seems intuitive that you could. So from cart, I'd have to bring my tip online, but I could certainly thrust in the same way, basically the same way I do with the saber. So I come to cart, drop my tip, extend, lunge. That works. You can do full thrusts with cane. You can just thrust straight, which is perfectly works. It's just I think theory or part of why they end up being tip slash for why. So the Andre Renault, actually my notes are all over there. But one of the defense fans of the guy said that they tend to end up, or thrusts ended up tip slashes. I think is more just because of the adrenaline of the moment. That it's a bit, particularly with the cane, it'd be a bit hard to line up properly the way you would with a foil, particularly with the balance this thing. It's not as balanced for thrusting as like a foil or a pegs. But certainly, you can totally chirp from the side, totally parry cart, come down, extend, and thrust. Same thing for the tierce parry, you just come down. And basically, when you thrust, you want to point your weapon, the blade of your weapon directly at your target, and extend the thrust. Certainly super viable. Cool. Bill said that's from the Old Spanish to quarter fencing system, which I don't know. So that'd be cool. I have seen there is an Iberian system of cane in that it's documented in, I know in both Portugal and Spain, like in Spanish and Portuguese, and it's relatively similar. I don't know if there's any manuals in Catalan, but there may be, or Basque for that matter. Actually, I think there is Basque references to this exact same system of cane fighting, but its most distinctive feature is that the guard is held, the cane is held down here, and you can strike with either hand, or just barge people with the middle. And I suppose that the idea, from what I've heard, and again, I don't know very little about the system, so if I'm wrong, if you look into it and I'm wrong, please make a video about not just how wrong I am, but also how the system actually works. Just because I think it looks cool, but don't really have time to explore it. Sadly. But yeah, the idea is also, if I have my cane out here, my opponent can't grab it. But if my opponent bears in on me, I can smack them right with the middle of the cane to drive them back, or or alternatively, I can just raise up to defend, which is all pretty cool. I think you actually see, I think Fairbairn's World War II guy has a similar thing where he keeps the cane quite low and reserved, and punch it out and use it quite close. So sort of, I think a similar idea is you're keeping this basically back so it can't be grabbed, and then just knocking it up or knocking it out the way, flicking out, which is kind of cool. There's a system of Irish stick fighting that has a guard like this that I've seen, but again, where you can fire from either hand, which is kind of cool. Again, don't know very much about this other than there's this guard and you can fire from either hand. I never know if I'm doing the technique right specifically, but I think it's cool and so worth mentioning. All right, cool. So, Heather said, no questions, seemed fairly straightforward. I'm glad. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's good. Cool. All right, well, I think that gets us pretty much to end time, to the end time. So yeah, thank you for joining us tonight. In a couple of minutes, we're going to be jumping on our Zoom account, just to do some socializing into chat. So I'll be on that, and if you want to join me, the link is obviously in the comments, in the chat for both this video, whether you're on YouTube or on Facebook. It'll be in the video description for if you're on YouTube as well, and the event description on Facebook. So check that out. But also, while you're here and while you've enjoyed the talk, also consider donating a bit of money to the Old Sword Club. Obviously, I'm going to try and keep these free. But we do have some expenses that we need to cover, particularly rent, domain hosting and things like that. And also we're trying to raise a bit of money to start physical classes again next year. So yeah, if you can donate some money, that'd be greatly appreciated. And any money that you donate will go 100% to the running of the club. And yeah, other than that, I think other thing to remember is we're doing another special event on Sunday. We're going to be talking about how you teach martial arts, or how martial arts are taught, and sort of different tricks with KF and Valkyrie martial arts. So yeah, come and join us for that. Join us on Zoom as well. And yeah, other than that,